In this tutorial, we're going to have a look at working with files, specifically text files, and reading individual lines of text from those files. Now, before we begin, you might want to go back and review the lecture on exceptions, because when we work with file I/O, there's going to be a lot of exceptions that could be thrown. Now, to begin with, what I'll do is come up here, and I'm going to start working with a file input stream, and I'll call it FIS. So I have a variable called FIS that is of type file input stream, and notice that it doesn't recognize what that is. So if I mouse over it, I can import file input stream, but I'm going to actually make that a little bit more generic and just say import java.io.star. And the reason is because there are several classes inside of that package that I want to work with. So if I were going to bring FIS to life, I could say FIS gets a new file input stream, and I have to pass it the name of a file. Well, I don't have a text file readily available, but I do have the code that I'm working on right here. In fact, it's in driver.java. So watch what I could do. I could say, let's open up source/driver.java. And the reason that this works is because where this executable actually runs, it can dive into the source directory and then open this driver.java that we're currently editing. Now, notice that there's a bunch of red squigglies under all of this code, and the reason is because it's going to complain and say, this can actually throw a file not found exception. So what are you going to do about it? Well, what we have to do about it is to put it in a try catch block. So I'll go ahead and do that and tab that over so it's readable, and then put catch file not found exception right here called E. And it's typically a good idea to print out whatever the error is. So I'll say e.getMessage. There we go. So at this point, it looks like we've cleared up a lot of errors. So your next inclination would be to start playing around with FIS and see what it's capable of doing. And notice that we're able to read, but we're only able to read bytes. In other words, I can read byte by byte, or I could read a block of bytes. But I really don't want to do that. I want to work with text. I'd like to be able to read in an entire string all at the same time. So because of this, we can come up here and we can work with yet another class called an input stream reader, and I'll call it ISR. And then I'll drop down here and say that ISR gets a new input stream reader, and I'll pass it FIS. Now, what's going on here is that ISR is an input stream reader that's able to read bytes and convert them into characters. Now that's still not exactly what I want to do, but we have this translation that's going on. FIS can only read bytes, but when I ask ISR to read something, it asks FIS for bytes, and then it converts them into characters. So that's still not very good. So what I'll do is I'll create a buffered reader and call it BR, and then come right here and say that BR gets a new buffered reader and pass it ISR. So watch what's going on. When I ask BR to read an entire line, it's going to ask ISR for individual characters, but ISR is actually asking FIS for individual bytes. So there's a lot of translation that's going on here, and it seems a little bit screwy, but look at the flexibility this allows us. I can actually read a wide variety of data types depending on what it is that I'm trying to do by getting this layered translation approach that we're using right here. Okay? Now, the next thing that I like to do is to close all the streams after I'm done working with them, because there's no reason to keep that file open. But notice that it's complaining. It's saying, hey, there's another unhandled exception that you need to deal with. So what I'll do is I'll come down here and I'll say catch an IO exception, and we'll call that one F. It doesn't really matter. And we can do the same thing that we did before. We can system.out.println e.getMessage. Okay, so that's probably good to begin with. Now, what do we want to do? Oop, that should be F, sorry. Okay, we can come back up here and we can start to read data from this file. So I'll say string data line gets br.readline. Now, when I've done this, I actually read the first line of text from the file that I've just opened. In other words, data line is actually going to have this import java.io.star line inside of it. That's what its value is going to be. But that's only one line. So how do we read multiple lines from this? Well, I can come right here and I can say, hey, so long as data line does not equal null, in other words, you haven't read an empty line, then we can print that line out. So I system.out.println data line, And then I make sure I want to read the next line. So I'll say that data line gets updated with whatever the next line is from that file. Now, if I were to run this and save my changes, I look down here, it's pretty interesting because now you can see that our output actually is the file that we're editing. So I can put even a comment right here. Let's say Jeff was here. And if I were to run it again and save my changes, and I scroll up, cancel that, you can see that Jeff was here is in the output. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding about how we can work with files. Just to let you know, if you want to explore, there's also a file output stream if you want to write to files. The only tricky part with that is that you want to make sure that after you've written something that you want to flush that stream. So you would say something like fos.flush, and then it would write the data out to the file. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.